Good evening, seekers of truth, keepers of legacy, and listeners who crave the untold stories behind the faces that shaped our past and our future. I am the Duke of New York, and you're listening to Faces of History, where we peel back the layers of time to reveal the brilliance, the struggle, and the triumph woven into the lives of remarkable individuals. Tonight, we journey into the stars, quite literally, through the mind of a woman whose calculations sent men beyond our atmosphere, who broke barriers with a pencil and a fierce mind sharpened against the harsh edges of segregation and doubt. Tonight, we meet Creola Katherine Johnson, the human computer whose numbers carried astronauts safely to the moon and back. Long before rockets thundered into the sky, before men strapped themselves inside tin capsules to chase the moon, there was a little girl standing barefoot under a canopy of West Virginia stars, counting. Creola Katherine Coleman, later known as Katherine Johnson, was born on August 26, 1918, in the tiny town of White Sulphur Springs, nestled in the Allegheny Mountains. She was the youngest of 4 children born to Joylette and Joshua Coleman, and from the moment she could speak, her curiosity made itself known in the simplest, most relentless way. Why? Why does the wind blow this way? Why do the numbers add up like that? Why can't she know more, read more, solve more? Catherine's father, Joshua, worked as a farmer, a handyman, and a lumberman, taking any job that would put food on the table. Her mother, Joylette, taught at a small local school for black children, a place with more determination than resources. In those days, segregation ruled the American South like an iron gate. For black families like the Colemans, opportunity was scarce and the promise of education even scarcer. But Joshua and Joylette Coleman believed fiercely that learning was not just a privilege. It was a shield, a weapon, and a path out of the smallness others forced upon them. By the age of 4, Catherine's family realized she was no ordinary child. She counted everything: the plates at dinner, the chickens in the yard, the steps between home and the one-room schoolhouse. Teachers quickly saw she was not just gifted, but prodigious. She skipped grades with a speed that made her both admired and sometimes resented by her classmates. By the time most children her age were still sounding out words, Catherine was devouring numbers and patterns like a language she was born speaking. There was, however, a wall that even brilliance could not break alone. In White Sulphur Springs, formal education for black children ended at the 8th grade. The nearest high school that would accept a black student was 125 miles away. Many families might have accepted this cruel limit. Not the Colemans. Joshua Coleman packed up his family each school year and moved to Institute, West Virginia, so Catherine and her siblings could attend high school at the West Virginia Institute, one of the few places in the state where black students could continue their education. Each year, when school ended, they moved back to White Sulphur Springs so Joshua could work the summer season at the Greenbrier Hotel, tending to the grounds for wealthy white vacationers. This back-and-forth migration showed Catherine 2 worlds, one where doors slammed shut simply because of her skin, and another where her mind, given enough room, could run free. At just 14 years old, Catherine graduated high school and enrolled at West Virginia State College, a historically black college where she found herself surrounded by minds and mentors who understood that genius could bloom anywhere, even in a segregated America. One professor who recognized her gifts was Dr. William W. Schieffelin Claytor, a trailblazer himself, only the 3rd African American to earn a doctorate in mathematics. Claytor knew Catherine would one day work in research mathematics, a field that, at the time, was almost entirely closed to black women. To help her prepare, Dr. Claytor carved out special courses just for her: advanced analytical geometry, complex mathematical theories, lessons that pushed her far beyond the standard curriculum. He would famously say, "You'd make a good research mathematician, Catherine, and I'm going to prepare you for that." Her college years were not easy. She was younger than most of her peers, isolated by her brilliance and by the expectations placed on her as a black woman, daring to dream of a place in science. But Catherine thrived. She joined a sorority, played the piano, tutored classmates who struggled with the numbers that danced so easily for her. In 1937, at the age of 18, she graduated summa cum laude with degrees in both mathematics and French, and stepped into a world that did not yet know what to do with a mind like hers. There was no NASA yet, no rockets waiting for her calculations, only a country that told her to go home, get married, and teach. And for a time, that's exactly what she did. She taught math at a black public school in Marion, Virginia. She married James Francis Goebel, an aspiring chemistry teacher. They built a family and had 3 daughters. Yet even then, the numbers never stopped whispering. Katherine knew her mind was capable of more than textbooks and chalkboards. She knew there was a universe beyond the one-room classrooms, a universe full of problems no one else could solve quite like she could. And so, a little girl who once counted stars from a dirt yard in West Virginia carried that same wonder in her pocket, waiting for the moment she would help all of humanity reach those same stars. Not with a rocket, but with the power of pure, precise thought. When Katherine Coleman Goebel walked across the stage to receive her degree in 1937, the ink on her diploma was hardly dry before the walls of segregation reminded her just how heavy they were. A brilliant black woman with a mathematics degree, a double major, no less, was not something 1930s America knew how to make room for. In an era where women of any color were expected to find fulfillment within the walls of their homes, Katherine's ambitions were quietly radical. With no clear path to research or advanced study, Katherine did what many brilliant black minds were forced to do. She taught. She stood before rows of black children who had never seen a research mathematician, because in truth, almost none existed. But in Katherine's presence, they glimpsed possibility. She taught in Marion, Virginia for a few years. Geometry, algebra, all the building blocks of higher math that might, just might, pry open doors for the next generation. During this time, she married James Francis Goebel, a chemistry teacher. Together, they built a family and dreamed of a future that would stretch far beyond the segregated classrooms they both knew so well. By the 1940s, Katherine had taken time off teaching to raise their 3 daughters, Joylette, Katherine, and Constance. Yet her mind, restless as ever, did not go quiet. Even while managing diapers, dishes, and domestic life, she read scientific journals, stayed sharp on new mathematical methods, and kept her skills alive in the only way she could, by refusing to let her mind grow dull in the confines of a segregated domestic life. Then came the winds of change. World War II. As the world plunged into conflict, America's technological demands soared. The war machine needed calculations, engineering, and thousands of minds to do the work. In 1941, President Franklin D. Roosevelt issued Executive Order 8802, which prohibited racial discrimination in the national defense industry. Though far from erasing segregation, this opened a crack in the wall for black professionals. For the first time, federal agencies and contractors had to look beyond the usual barriers when hiring talent. For a while, the Goebel family stayed put. Katherine raised her daughters while her husband worked and battled illness that would later shorten his life. But by 1952, the pull of numbers and the possibility of putting her mind to work in the service of something larger became impossible to ignore. That year, a relative told Katherine about positions at the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, NACA, the predecessor to NASA, at Langley Research Center in Hampton, Virginia. NACA was expanding rapidly, desperate for new talent as Cold War tensions heated up. They needed computers, human computers, people who could crunch endless streams of data before machines could do it. It was an opening, not in a lab full of white coats and beakers, but at a drafting table littered with pencils and slide rules. It was also segregated. The West Area Computing Unit was the section where black women worked. They were called the colored computers, tucked away from the white women who did the same work in other sections of Langley. Still, for Katherine, it was a foot in the door. The first crack of light she'd been waiting for since leaving West Virginia State. She applied. She was hired. She packed up her family and moved to Hampton. In 1953, at 34 years old, Katherine Goebel reported for duty at Langley. When Katherine walked into the West Area Computing Unit for the first time, she entered a world that was both segregated and indispensable. She sat alongside other brilliant black women, Dorothy Vaughan, Mary Jackson, Christine Darden, names the world would one day come to know as hidden figures. They were given stacks of data sheets, tasked with analyzing flight tests, solving equations, and checking the work of the male engineers. Work critical to national defense and the race for the skies. Despite the clear importance of their work, the signs of segregation were impossible to ignore. There were separate bathrooms marked colored women, separate dining areas, separate office spaces. Their desks were often tucked away, as if brilliance might be contagious if it got too close to white colleagues. But Katherine was not a woman easily confined to her assigned corner. She believed in the power of showing up and speaking up. When a temporary assignment landed her in the Flight Research Division, she did what few black women dared. She asked to stay. When she saw men in meetings that could shape the future of her calculations, she demanded to be in those meetings too. When someone told her, "Girls don't go to those briefings," Katherine simply asked, "Is there a law against it?" No one could find a law, so she stayed. At Langley, Katherine's fearless curiosity and mastery of numbers shattered more than physical barriers. She broke the invisible wall that kept women, and black women especially, from claiming authorship of technical papers. She co-authored her first report in 1959, an achievement that made her one of the first women in Flight Research Division history to receive credit on such a document. She learned to navigate a room of engineers, men who were often skeptical of a woman's presence, let alone a black woman's authority. Katherine's approach was simple. The numbers spoke for themselves. When they were right, they were right. And no amount of prejudice could argue with precise math. In these years, Katherine's husband, James Goebel, fell gravely ill with an inoperable brain tumor. Balancing the demands of her work, 3 daughters, and her husband's declining health tested her resolve. But Katherine kept going, Cadrell home. She solved equations at her kitchen table while tending to her children and her ailing husband. In 1956, James passed away, leaving Katherine a widow at 38. Heartbroken but undeterred, she continued her work at Langley, pushing her calculations further into the realm of human spaceflight as NACA evolved into a new agency, NASA. She would remarry years later to James A. Johnson, a decorated U.S. Army officer, but her true lifelong partner was always the work itself, the mission to push humanity beyond the boundaries of the Earth, one calculation at a time. Katherine Goebel Johnson broke through the walls of segregation not by asking permission, but by showing up with numbers no one could ignore. Her mind, her questions, and her courage to sit at the tables where she was told she didn't belong cracked the barriers that racism and sexism had built brick by brick. And as America's dreams turned upward, toward the stars, it would be her pencil, her equations, and her stubborn refusal to stay silent that would make those dreams possible. By the late 1950s, the quiet hum of Langley's drafting rooms had become the beating heart of America's desperate push to outrun the Soviets to the heavens. The Cold War wasn't just fought with spies and speeches. It was waged with numbers, slide rules, wind tunnels, and the unspoken dread that if the United States didn't reach orbit first, they might lose the ultimate high ground forever. This was the world Katherine Johnson stepped into as the 1950s turned into the turbulent 1960s. NACA had become NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, and the stakes were no longer simply aerodynamic tests for faster airplanes. Now the mission was human spaceflight, putting an American into orbit and, someday, onto the moon. And for that mission, the agency didn't just need engineers. They needed someone who could translate the chaos of the universe into numbers that could be trusted with human life. They needed a mind like Katherine Johnson's. Katherine's reputation spread through Langley like an open secret. If you wanted the numbers done right, you brought them to her desk. Her pencil drew arcs that wrapped around the Earth, lines that described re-entry angles, orbital paths, fuel burns, and launch windows. Her first major breakthrough came with Project Mercury, America's first manned spaceflight program. Here, she calculated the trajectory for Alan Shepard's Freedom 7 mission, the flight that made Shepard the first American in space in May 1961. Calculating that path was not simply about shooting a rocket straight up. Katherine had to account for the Earth's rotation, gravitational pull, atmospheric drag, engine thrust, and the need to land in the Atlantic Ocean within reach of waiting Navy ships. One small error, and Shepard might never be found again, lost to the ocean or worse, to the endless sky. Katherine did the math. Her trajectory held. Shepard flew his suborbital arc and splashed down safely. America took its first step into space, carried there on the strength of equations that no one double-checked because Katherine had done the checking already. Then came John Glenn, the mission that would make Katherine Johnson a legend, though for decades her name would remain known only in whispers inside NASA's corridors. In 1962, the plan was audacious: put Glenn aboard the Friendship 7 spacecraft and make him the first American to orbit the Earth. This was not just about proving the rockets could fly. It was about proving America could match or surpass the Soviet Union's leap ahead with Yuri Gagarin's orbit the year before. The new IBM computers, clunky, temperamental, and prone to glitches, would run the orbital calculations. But Glenn, whose life would depend on those computers, was not convinced they were foolproof. Before he climbed into his suit and stepped into history, John Glenn turned to his engineers and issued a simple but historic command: get the girl to check the numbers. He meant Katherine. Glenn trusted the computers, but he trusted Katherine Johnson more. For hours, Katherine sat at her desk with her pencils and slide rules, running the same equations by hand that IBM's punch cards had churned out. She mapped Glenn's orbital path, the angles at which he would pierce the atmosphere, the precise moment his capsule would separate, the re-entry that would bring him hurtling back through the atmosphere at thousands of miles per hour, shielded only by heat tiles and trust in her numbers. When she was done, she gave her answer. The figures matched. Glenn said, "If she says they're good, then I'm ready to go." He climbed into the Friendship 7 and became the first American to circle the Earth 3 times. He splashed down safely, the capsule bobbing in the Atlantic like a promise kept, a testament that a pencil in the right hands could rival a $1 million computer. But Katherine Johnson's work didn't stop with Mercury. When President John F. dared the nation to put a man on the moon and return him safely to Earth before the end of the decade, NASA turned to the minds that had proven themselves under fire, minds like Katherine's. She contributed critical calculations for Apollo 11, the mission that would carry Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins across 250,000 miles of empty blackness to the Sea of Tranquility. Her work on backup navigation charts ensured that if Apollo 11's digital computers failed, and space is never short of surprises, the astronauts could still find their way home using handwritten charts based on her trajectory equations. In essence, when Armstrong stepped onto the lunar surface and uttered his immortal words, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind," the footprints he left behind were traced first by Katherine's pencil, scribbling equations in a segregated office that no longer held her brilliance captive. She even contributed to the Space Shuttle program and to plans for future Mars missions, reminding the world that exploration is not just a matter of fuel and steel, it's the domain of mathematics, painstakingly crafted by human minds that dare to dream and do the work to make those dreams real. The numbers were never just abstract. They were a promise, a bridge between what humanity was and what it could become. Each calculation, each checked trajectory, each paper published was a quiet revolution, made all the more remarkable because she did it in a place that told her, over and over again, that she did not belong. But the stars don't care about prejudice, and numbers, when written true, break through every barrier. Katherine Johnson proved that one woman's mind, sharp, insistent, and unbowed, could guide humanity's fragile dreams safely home. When the rockets launched, the world cheered the astronauts. Names like Alan Shepard, John Glenn, Neil Armstrong, they became heroes immortalized in parades, textbooks, and grainy black and white broadcasts that captured mankind's leap into the unknown. But behind the roar of engines and the fluttering flags was a quieter force, a black woman with a pencil, a stack of equations, and a stubborn insistence that her work deserved to be seen, credited, and remembered. In the stark, fluorescent corridors of NASA, Katherine Johnson earned the respect of her colleagues not through protest or loud defiance, but through excellence that could not be dismissed. Every report she touched, every trajectory she checked, every impossible re-entry angle she calculated chipped away at the myth that brilliance had a single face, a single gender, a single color. Yet for decades, the public did not know her name. Her greatest contributions lived in footnotes, inside technical reports rarely read by anyone outside the elite circles of aerospace engineering. While astronauts posed for Life magazine covers, Katherine and her colleagues in the West Area Computing Unit worked in the shadows, their faces mostly invisible to the nation they were helping lift skyward. Within those walls, Katherine refused to be invisible. She demanded her seat at meetings that had never before welcomed a Black woman, or any woman. She asked questions that startled engineers who assumed the girls were there only to copy numbers, not understand or challenge them. Katherine's quiet courage didn't come from rebellion for rebellion's sake. It came from her deep belief that the work was too important to leave room for anyone's small-minded prejudice. When someone told her, "You don't belong here," she didn't raise her voice. She raised her hand with the solution they hadn't thought of yet. When she authored or co-authored 26 research reports, rare at a time when women were often left off official documents entirely, she carved her name into a field that had been, and in many ways still was, a fortress of white male authority. Each report was a quiet victory, a statement that her mind was not a temporary visitor in that space. It belonged there. In 1959, her co-authored work on orbital flight became foundational reading for later missions. Her reputation made her the engineer astronauts trusted when their lives would hang in the balance between atmosphere and vacuum. But beyond the numbers and calculations, Katherine's greatest impact was what she made possible for those who came after her. She inspired other Black women to push open doors in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, fields that once had no entry signs for people who looked like her. As the decades rolled on, Katherine watched the space program evolve. She saw computers shrink from room-sized behemoths to desktop machines. She witnessed the moon landings, the tragedies of Challenger and Columbia, the triumphs of the space shuttle program, all while knowing that her fingerprints were on the trajectory that made them possible. She retired from NASA in 1986 after 33 years of service. By then, many of the barriers she'd faced had begun to crack, but only because people like her kept pressing quietly, persistently, for the right to sit at the table and sign their names to their own work. Even after retirement, she stayed active, speaking at schools, mentoring young students, reminding girls who looked like her that mathematics was not a man's world, nor a white world. It was a human world. Her speeches were not fiery or grandiose. They were clear, direct. Do your best. Learn all you can. Don't be afraid of numbers. And then, after decades in the shadows, the world finally caught up to her story. In 2015, at age 97, Katherine Johnson stood in the White House, small and smiling beside President Barack Obama as he placed the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest civilian honor, around her neck. For once, the cameras turned to her, not to astronauts or engineers who had long since become household names. And when the world asked, "Who is this woman?" the answer came in the form of a book, Hidden Figures, by Margot Lee Shetterly. The book peeled back the decades of anonymity and showed the world the power of Black women at NASA. Katherine, Dorothy Vaughan, Mary Jackson, Christine Darden, the mathematicians and engineers who had kept America's space dreams alive with pencils, graph paper, and determination. In 2016, Hidden Figures became a Hollywood film. Audiences who had grown up thinking the space race was only about white men in flight suits finally saw the faces of the women who crunched the numbers behind the scenes. In the darkness of movie theaters around the world, people watched as Taraji P. Henson brought Katherine Johnson's genius and quiet courage to life. But even with the applause, the speeches, the standing ovations, Katherine Johnson never saw herself as a hero in the traditional sense. She saw herself as someone who did her job, did it well, and never accepted the smallness others tried to impose on her. To her, her legacy was not only the astronauts she helped carry home or the moon footprints she helped make possible. It was the generations who would never again have to wonder if there was a place for them in math, science, and the stars. When asked what her proudest moment was, Katherine said simply, "I loved going to work every single day. A quiet impact, a loud legacy. A mind but kept its feet on the ground, reminding us that changing the course of history doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes comes with a pencil scratching out numbers until the universe gives up its secrets. Time, as any mathematician will tell you, is another variable to solve, a dimension we measure but never fully master. And in the final stretch of her life, Katherine Johnson, who had once measured the path of stars and orbits and found herself at last being measured by a grateful world that was finally ready to understand what she had given them. After she retired from NASA in 1986, Katherine did not vanish into quiet obscurity, not in the way people expected from a hidden figure. Instead, she kept showing up. She spoke at schools, universities, churches, and conferences, her voice soft but her message unyielding. Math is not beyond you. The door you want to walk through, it is not locked. She encouraged young girls, especially black girls, to see numbers not as barriers, but as keys. She told them about the endless hours she spent double-checking equations when mistakes meant death for astronauts and disgrace for the entire program. She talked about the power of simply asking to be included, of ignoring the unwritten rules that said no and making her own rule that said yes. Katherine's second marriage, to James A. Johnson, a Korean War veteran and U.S. Army officer, brought her love and stability through her retirement years. They traveled, they attended community events, they watched their children grow into accomplished women who carried their mother's quiet strength forward in their own fields. She was recognized more in her 90s than she ever had been in her 30s. A truth both bittersweet and fitting for a woman who never did the work for glory, but never denied that the glory was due. In 2016, when the movie Hidden Figures was released, Katherine's story reached millions more than any NASA press release ever could. She became an icon, celebrated by a new generation who saw in her not just a historical footnote, but a living example of unshakable brilliance. At award shows and red carpets, the world finally looked her in the eyes and thanked her for lifting them toward the stars. For a woman who had once eaten lunch alone in a colored computer's office, the bright lights of Hollywood were more surreal than the vacuum of space itself. And yet, true to form, she accepted the praise with the same simple dignity she'd shown her entire life, by smiling, thanking everyone, and telling young people, "If you want to know how I did it, I counted everything. I always asked questions. I never stopped learning." NASA, too, worked to make up for lost time. In 2017, they named a new research facility in her honor, the Katherine G. Johnson Computational Research Facility at Langley, the very campus where a sign once told her which bathroom she could use and which cafeteria she could not enter. Now her name crowned a building dedicated to the same pursuit she had given her life to, solving the problems that push humanity forward. She received honorary degrees from universities that would never have admitted her when she was 15 and blazing through algebra in the segregated hills of West Virginia. In 2019, NASA awarded her its most prestigious honor, the Congressional Gold Medal, recognizing that her pencil had carved a path to the heavens as surely as any rocket engine. She passed away peacefully at the age of 101, a number, like so many before, that she had met with grace, precision, and unwavering resolve. When she died, the world did not stay silent. Presidents, astronauts, scientists, teachers, students, people she'd never met but whom she had lifted with every calculation, paused to remember her. NASA's statement was simple and fitting. Her legacy of excellence broke down racial and social barriers while helping to get our astronauts to space. In the end, Katherine Johnson's story is not just about the moon landings, Mercury capsules, or the space shuttle's arcs across the stratosphere. It is about the quiet audacity to believe that a black girl from a segregated town could stand before the laws of physics and master them. It is about refusing to be hidden. It is about showing up with the truth when the truth was a pencil and a sheet of paper covered in numbers. Look up at the moon tonight. It's not as far away as it used to be. Between you and that distant silver light is the work of many hands, many minds, many lives woven into the fabric of human possibility. Among them, Katherine Johnson's equations orbit still, guiding satellites that whisper around our planet, guiding students who crack open textbooks and find her name inside. A hidden figure no longer, a face of history forever. This was Katherine Johnson's final chapter, a reminder that brilliance outlasts prejudice, that courage outlasts doubt, and that a mind once set free can take all of humanity to the stars. You have been listening to Faces of History with me, the Duke of New York. Tonight, we honored the life of Creola Katherine Johnson, mathematician, trailblazer, and hidden figure no more. If you found inspiration in Catherine's story, share this episode. Tell someone who needs to know that a single mind can move mountains or launch rockets. Until next time, remember, the faces of history are mirrors. Look closely. Look closely. You might see your own reflection. Good night, and keep reaching for the stars.